You were taught that marriage is the destination of a human life, that getting married is synonymous with maturity, stability, and success. But if Machiavelli were alive today, he would ask you a far colder question. Who truly benefits when you step into marriage? In the world of power, there is no concept of the sacred, only instruments. And marriage, in Machiavelli's eyes, is not eternal love, but a perfected mechanism designed to make human beings easier to control. An unbound man is an unknown variable. He is hard to predict, hard to coerce, hard to domesticate. But once he has a family, responsibilities, something to lose, he becomes more obedient, more cautious, and less dangerous. Society calls this stability. Power calls it success. This video is not meant to persuade you to hate marriage. It does something more dangerous than that. It strips away the illusion, allowing you to see marriage as Machiavelli saw it. A move in a game of power larger than yourself. According to Machiavelli, society never fears the weak. What makes order tremble is always the dangerous individual, one with his own will, not easily predicted, not easily bought, not easily forced into a mold. This is the type of person who can overturn the rules, rewrite the order, and therefore must be controlled. Marriage, in Machiavelli's view, is one of the most sophisticated tools for achieving exactly that. On the surface, marriage is dressed in the language of love, stability, and morality. It is told as a beautiful story, two people leaning on each other, building a family, becoming adults. But Machiavelli would not look at the story. He would look at the outcome. And the outcome is always the same. The man who was once free, once willing to take risks, once capable of causing instability, begins to become safe. Not because he has become lesser, but because he now has something to lose. A family, children, loans, responsibilities. From that moment on, life energy once used to explore, to conquer, to build something of one's own, is redirected. It no longer flows into ambition, but into obligation. No longer into creating a new order, but into maintaining the old one. Machiavelli understood this clearly. A good citizen is an anchored individual. When people are bound, they become predictable. When they are predictable, they are easy to govern. Society does not need violence. It only needs to make you believe that marriage is what should be done, has drive. And when you step into it willingly, you also willingly step away from the position of the dangerous man. The wild horse metaphor is not an insult, it is a naked truth. A wild horse runs free, difficult to control, but powerful. A horse in the stable is fed, groomed, protected, but no longer chooses its path. Marriage operates by the same logic. It does not destroy you. It tames you. And the most dangerous part is this. You will call that taming maturity. When the individual dissolves into herd morality, he no longer asks, "Who do I want to become?" He asks, "Who do others want me to become?" That is the moment power wins. Machiavelli does not condemn marriage because it is bad. He warns against it because it is effective. Effective at transforming people capable of disrupting order into people busy keeping that order running smoothly. And the real question is not, is marriage good or bad? It is, are you willing to trade your dangerous potential for that safety? If Machiavelli looked at love, he would not ask how noble it is, but ask a single question: whose interests does it serve? And when love is placed under that lens, combined with Schopenhauer's cold intuition, an uncomfortable truth begins to emerge. What we call love is very rarely a free choice. Most of the time, it is a biological reflex dressed in poetry. Schopenhauer stated plainly what people do not want to hear. Love, at its deepest level, is an impulse in service of reproduction. The brain creates passion, obsession, the feeling of I can't live without you. Not to make you happy, but to make you act in accordance with nature's program. That intensity of emotion does not ask who you are, what mission you carry, or what future you want to build. It asks only one thing. Are you ready to bind yourself tightly to another human being? Machiavelli would immediately recognize the danger here, because an individual driven by powerful emotion is an individual easily manipulated. When reason is clouded, people sign long-term commitments. They have never analyzed through the lenses of power, interest, and consequence. Marriage, in that case, is no longer a strategic choice. It is the after-effect of a biological intoxication. The problem is not the moment of falling in love. The problem lies in what comes after. When the biological objective has been fulfilled, when emotions subside, what remains is structure, obligation, responsibility, roles. And this is when the individual begins to pay the price. Freedom is fragmented. Identity is negotiated. Decisions that once belonged to me must now pass through us. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Power is not taken away in a single moment, but eroded slowly, piece by piece. Marriage equals half the freedom, double the obligation, is not a cynical remark. It is a calculation. When you have a family, every decision carries risk, not only for you, but for those who depend on you. And as risk increases, people naturally become more cautious, more conservative, less willing to gamble. This is exactly what every system of power desires. People with many things to lose. Schopenhauer called this the trap of the will to live. Asti. Machiavelli would name it more precisely. A mechanism of social stabilization. No coercion required. No violence needed. All that is necessary is to make people believe their emotions are truth. And when they act on those emotions, they voluntarily step into an order where they are predictable, manageable, and less dangerous. This does not mean love is false, but it does mean love is not innocent. The question Machiavelli would force you to confront is not, do you love? It is, are you lucid enough to know what you are trading away for that emotion? If Machiavelli were to hear Sartre say that man is condemned to be free, he would nod, not out of philosophical sympathy, but because he understood that freedom is always a threat to every power structure. A truly free individual is unpredictable, difficult to control, and always carries the potential to break the rules of the game. That is precisely why society must find ways to make people voluntarily relinquish freedom, and marriage is one of the most effective paths. Freedom, as Sartre pointed out, is not a comforting gift. It is a burden. When you are completely free, no framework protects you. No one tells you who you must become. There is no predefined role to hide inside. You must answer the hardest question of human life yourself. Who am I, and how will I live? For most people, that question is terrifying. And Machiavelli understood this well. When people are afraid, they are willing to hand decision-making power to any structure that promises safety. Marriage, in that context, becomes a perfect escape. Step into it, and you immediately receive titles: husband, wife, father, mother, provider. You no longer have to define yourself. Society does it for you. You no longer have to ask what you want. Responsibility answers on your behalf. Sartre called this bad faith, deceiving oneself into believing there is no alternative, when in reality one has chosen to flee from freedom. Machiavelli would observe this phenomenon not with moral judgment, but with cold pragmatism. An individual burdened with many social roles is an individual who is easy to predict. He wakes up for family, works out of responsibility, and makes decisions based on duty rather than desire. He is no longer a threat to order, because order now lives inside him. This is the most refined form of imprisonment. No bars required, only obligation. What is striking is that this imprisonment is entirely voluntary. No one is forced. On the contrary, society celebrates it. Those who enter marriage are called mature, stable, trustworthy. And when rewarded, people are even less likely to question their choices. Machiavelli understood this. The most effective prison is one in which the prisoner believes he is living correctly. According to Sartre, human beings always have a choice, but most choose to pretend they do not. And Machiavelli would add a more disturbing layer, not because they are weak, but because the system is designed to make surrendering freedom more comfortable than carrying it. Marriage, in that case, is not a crude chain. It is a soft armchair, a place where you sit down, exhale in relief, and gradually forget that you once could stand up and walk anywhere. The final question is not whether marriage is right or wrong. It is this: do you enter it as a lucid choice, or as an excuse to avoid defining yourself? If Machiavelli observed history through the eyes of a strategist of power, he would quickly recognize a chillingly repetitive pattern. Those who change the world rarely live according to the mold society expects, not because they despise family or reject morality, but because they understand a truth the majority dare not face. A great mission always demands a great price. Look at the names that bent history. Newton lived his entire life in solitude to pursue the laws of the universe. Tesla sacrificed personal life so electricity could illuminate the world. Leonardo da Vinci remained unbound by family, so his intellect could roam freely between art, science, and engineering. Descartes lived apart, so he could dare to doubt everything, even reality itself. These individuals did not lack marriage. They rejected the distraction marriage brings, because they understood that what they were pursuing was greater than personal stability. Machiavelli would not call this a romantic sacrifice. He would call it the prioritization of power, because power, whether intellectual, political, or creative, demands absolute focus. An individual bound by deep emotional ties must constantly negotiate between mission and obligation. And in every such negotiation, the mission usually loses. Even more modern philosophers such as Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, and Kierkegaard grasped this intuitively. They did not remain outside marriage because they were incapable of love, but because they understood that love can become a strategic vulnerability. Kierkegaard broke off his engagement just before the wedding because he knew that if he stepped into it, he would no longer have full sovereignty over his inner life. Sartre rejected marriage so that freedom would not be transformed into a binding promise. Camus lived with the paradox of attachment without formalization, preserving space for inner rebellion. And when looking at the modern era, Machiavelli would not be surprised by figures such as James Cameron or Elon Musk. Their failed marriages were not accidents, but consequences of placing mission above emotional stability. They did not fail at love because they were selfish. They failed because they were unwilling to allow any relationship to limit their vision. For Machiavelli, this is not a moral defect, but a strategic choice. The central argument here is unmistakably clear. They were not great despite chaotic emotional lives, but because they did not allow personal relationships to become chains that bound their life's mission. Society praises stability because stability is easy to manage. But history is not written by stable people. It is written by those willing to live outside the mold, to accept being misunderstood, isolated, even condemned, in exchange for the power to shape the world. Machiavelli would conclude coldly, norms exist to preserve order, not to create greatness. And anyone who harbors ambition beyond that order must answer an uncompromising question. How much personal attachment are you willing to trade away in order not to betray your mission? If Machiavelli were to read Kierkegaard, he would not linger on the romantic pain of a philosopher who broke off an engagement, but would see in it the core tragedy of every power-based choice. Kierkegaard said, "The individual is higher than the universal," a statement that sounds spiritual, but under Machiavelli's gaze carries a far more dangerous meaning. Anyone who places the individual above the collective order becomes a potential threat to society. Marriage, family, stability, these constitute the universal. They are protected, celebrated, and deemed righteous by society. But Kierkegaard understood something few dare to admit. Living in accordance with the universal does not mean living in accordance with oneself. And when the two come into conflict, one must choose. There is no third path. Machiavelli would nod at the cruelty of this truth, because in politics and power, every choice carries a cost, and no choice is harmless. Kierkegaard did not claim that not marrying would lead to happiness. He said something more bitter. Whether you marry or not, you will regret it. But there are regrets that allow you to remain yourself, and regrets that cause you to lose your essence without even being able to name it. The safe path, marriage, family, social roles brings approval. It allows you to merge into order and be recognized as proper. But Machiavelli understood that approval always comes with a hidden price. You must surrender absolute sovereignty over your own life. You no longer live as an individual, but as a function within a larger structure. And that structure does not care who you are, only whether you function correctly. The other path is the opposite. It is uncertain, lonely, and full of risk. You may fail. You may be judged. You may live with the pain of having no place to lean. But it is the only path that allows you to take full responsibility for yourself. Kierkegaard called this being faithful to one's essence. Machiavelli would name it more precisely, retaining ultimate power over one's own life. The tragedy of choice lies here. Society will always reward you for choosing the safe path and punish you for choosing the other. But history is not guided by those rewarded by society. It is shaped by individuals willing to accept the cost of uncertainty. Kierkegaard chose the pain of abandoning a guaranteed future rather than the quiet agony of living a life that was not his own. Machiavelli would not romanticize that choice. He would simply remind you of one cold truth. Once you hand over the authority to define your life to the collective order, you are no longer the master of your own fate. And the question Kierkegaard leaves behind, the same question Machiavelli forces you to answer, is not how happy you will be, but this: what kind of regret are you willing to live with in order not to betray yourself? If Machiavelli were to enter into dialogue with Kant, it would not be a debate about morality, but a test of the viability of reason in human life. Kant believed that marriage could be a legitimate choice, but only under an almost ideal condition, that it be a free, rational, lucid decision made by two fully formed individuals, who do not need each other to fill any inner void. In theory, this sounds noble, but Machiavelli would smile coldly, because he understood that theory rarely survives contact with human nature. Reality shows brutally that what this video points out is true. Marriages of the kind Kant described are exceptions, not the rule. Most people do not enter marriage because they are strong enough, but because they are afraid of being weak, afraid of loneliness, afraid of being left behind, afraid of not being recognized, afraid of having to stand on their own. And Machiavelli understood this clearly. Every decision born from fear is a decision that is easy to manipulate. When two incomplete individuals seek each other out, marriage ceases to be a union of strength and becomes an accumulation of deficiencies. In that case, neither side is searching for a partner, but for a support. And the moment you need support, you have already placed yourself in a position of weakness. Machiavelli would call this a strategic error, because any relationship built on need creates dependency. And wherever there is dependency, there is a loss of power. Only when two people have already become independent empires with their own goals, their own identities, their own capacity for self-sufficiency, does marriage cease to become a chain. In that rare case, the relationship does not drain energy, it amplifies it, not to shield fear, but to coordinate strength. Machiavelli would not oppose this kind of marriage because it does not weaken the individual. On the contrary, it can become a strategic alliance. But here lies the uncomfortable truth. Most people lack the patience, the discipline, or the courage to build themselves to that level before marrying. Society does not encourage you to become an independent empire. It encourages you to settle down early, put down roots, establish a family, because incomplete people who are already bound are the easiest to manage. They do not dare to take risks. They do not dare to change direction. They do not dare to do anything that might cause the structure they rely on to collapse. Kant believed in humanity's capacity for reason. Machiavelli believed in the reality of power, and that reality shows this. Rational marriage is possible but extremely rare, because it requires you to defeat your own fear of loneliness before defeating anyone else. The final question is not, can marriage be noble? It is, do you enter it as an individual who is already strong, or as someone looking for a place to hide? If Machiavelli were to leave one final message, he would not advise you to marry or not to marry. He would do something far more uncomfortable, force you to look directly at the true motive behind that choice. Because in the world of power, what determines fate is not the action itself, but the reason behind the action. And the existential question this video raises is precisely the one Machiavelli would never ignore. Do you enter marriage with conscious freedom, or as an escape from that freedom? There is a path society has already laid out. It is familiar, safe, and rewarded. You marry at the right time, build a family, become reliable and responsible. On that path, you are rarely criticized. You are recognized, called mature, seen as settled. But Machiavelli understood clearly, society's approval is never free. In exchange, you must accept living within the limits society sets. You gain safety, but you lose danger. You gain protection, but you become predictable. And predictable people never shake history. The other path is entirely different. It offers no promise of comfort. It demands that you stand alone before decisions with no ready-made answers. You must build yourself first, before thinking of binding your life to another. This path is dangerous because it comes with no guarantees. You may fail. You may be lonely. You may be misunderstood as selfish, eccentric, or mistaken. But Machiavelli would recognize here something he always respected: absolute autonomy. Not everyone is born to walk this path, and Machiavelli does not romanticize it. He simply states the truth. The world is not changed by those who seek safety. It is changed by individuals who dare to carry uncertainty within themselves, who dare to accept risk, and who dare to pay the price of not living by the common script. Nietzsche called them dangerous men. Machiavelli would call them those who hold real power over their own lives. The final message, therefore, is not a call to oppose marriage. It is a warning against unconsciousness. Marriage, like any social structure, becomes dangerous only when you enter it without knowing what you are trading away. When you use it to avoid the question, "Who am I?" instead of confronting and answering that question first. Machiavelli would conclude coldly, you do not need to be dangerous to the world, but you must not be harmless to yourself. If you choose marriage after you have built yourself, it can become an alliance. But if you choose it to flee from freedom, it will become a chain. And in the end, the question is not which path is right. It is this: which path allows you to become the person you were born to be, not merely the person society needs you to be. Machiavelli would not advise you to marry or not to marry. He would only force you to take responsibility for your choice. Marriage is not a bad thing. What is dangerous is entering it unconsciously. Out of fear of loneliness, out of age-related pressure, out of society's gaze. In the world of power, that is not love. It is surrender, decorated with ritual. If you choose marriage after you have built yourself, after you know who you are, what you want, and what you are willing to pay for it, then marriage can become an alliance. But if you choose it to escape freedom, to avoid the question, "Who am I?" then regardless of rings or vows, you have already placed yourself inside a cage that requires no lock. Machiavelli believed this. The dangerous person is not the one who destroys order, but the one who refuses to live by a pre-written script. The world is not changed by safe people. It is changed by individuals lucid enough not to betray themselves. If this video made you think, like it. If you want to continue viewing life through the lens of power, subscribe and leave a comment. I choose consciousness, not unconsciousness, because the most frightening thing is not loneliness, but living an entire life that was never chosen by you, because power, whether intellectual, political, or creative, demands absolute focus. An individual bound by deep emotional ties must constantly negotiate between mission and obligation. And in every such negotiation, the mission usually loses. Even more modern philosophers such as Nietzsche, Sartre, Camus, and Kierkegaard grasped this intuitively. They did not remain outside marriage because they were incapable of love, but because they understood that love can become a strategic vulnerability. Kierkegaard broke off his engagement just before the wedding because he knew that if he stepped into it, he would no longer have full sovereignty over his inner life. Sartre rejected marriage so that freedom would not be transformed into a binding promise. Camus lived with the paradox of attachment without formalization, preserving space for inner rebellion. And when looking at the modern era, Machiavelli would not be surprised by figures such as James Cameron or Elon Musk. Their failed marriages were not accidents, but consequences of placing mission above emotional stability. They did not fail at love because they were selfish. They failed because they were unwilling to allow any relationship to limit their vision. For Machiavelli, this is not a moral defect, but a strategic choice. The central argument here is unmistakably clear. They were not great despite chaotic emotional lives, but because they did not allow personal relationships to become chains that bound their life's mission. Society praises stability because stability is easy to manage. But history is not written by stable people. It is written by those willing to live outside the mold, to accept being misunderstood, isolated, even condemned, in exchange for the power to shape the world. Machiavelli would conclude coldly, norms exist to preserve order, not to create greatness. And anyone who harbors ambition beyond that order must answer an uncompromising question. How much personal attachment are you willing to trade away in order not to betray your mission?